Welcome to ReGen Ag Chat. My name is Genever.
And I'm Nic Renison.
So this is number 2 of a series that we're talking to people we consider to be disruptors. But actually there's quite a lot of other common themes, and most of it is about them, why they have chosen to be within the agriculture and horticultural world. And you can tell that they're incredibly passionate about what we do. So the next one, we spoke to Holly last time. This time we're speaking to James Edwards. Nick is a fan after seeing his legs at Carbon Calling. Just talk us through the decision about selecting for James to talk.
Well, James, when you see him, he looks like an explorer, doesn't he? He
Definitely.
Could be some, wild man from the woods. But I follow him on Instagram. But before, when he arrived at Carbon Calling, I'd never met him before. I'd never followed him. And he's just like a whirlwind, like an intellectual whirlwind, I'd say. And probably for some people will be like Marmite. But he's a real...
He likes that.
Pardon?
He likes it.
Yeah. And I think we got quite deep with him. He's very, very honest and open. And I think he's going to come to Carbon Calling and do some music. But it was just, I really enjoyed the chat. And I just enjoyed how honest he was about his failings as well.
But he was still best friends with his parents.
I know. Oh, God. And I think there's something when we talk to him about why he's farming or how he got into farming, he's the kind of chap that could have done anything, and he would have done anything really well. But also when he talks about, he had a job, and it'll be obviously in the chat, but he's worked with some kids that have had a really hard time before he got into farming, and that has really affected how he then sees the world. And I hope everyone enjoys it. And it's relatively long chat, but I think we were both smiling by the end of it, weren't we? And feeling very grateful, Liz, that we'd met him.
And his summary of being kind to yourself. That was his advice to his younger self when I finally got that question.
And the sound quality, he was sitting, I think he sits in lay-bys a lot. He was sitting in a lay-by in Hampshire. And the light, we started up recording at 4:00 and then we finished at 5:30, and it was quite dark.
It didn't look dodgy at all.
No, it didn't look dodgy.
With 8 dogs in his car in various forms. So yeah.
But yeah, I think you'll enjoy it.
So James has had a varied background. He's been dog training, he's been gamekeeping, he's organised raves, he's managed hostels, worked as a counsellor with kids and taught bushcraft. He is a first-generation farmer and works for others, mainly with sheep and some conservation grazing, and he's up for most things. He came to Carbon Calling in 2024 and made an impression, so we thought he would be good in this series.
So James came to Carbon Calling this year, and I remember him walking in with in shorts, very attractive legs, and dreadlocks. And he's the kind of chap that catches your eye. So he embraced Carbon Calling fully. And Liz and I thought it'd be interesting to get him on the chat. And the more I've stalked him on Instagram, he's become even more interesting. But James, to begin, can you just give us a little bit of history about baby James, teenage James, adolescent James?
Right. So I grew up in Wales, in South Wales, near a town called Usk, in a lovely place called Gwahelog. And it's sort of in the middle of nowhere, not in a farming family, not from a farming background, but in a very rural part of Wales. So it was just like farming was all around. And where I went to school, it was still at a time when there hadn't been the shift of sort of like people buying houses who were working in Cardiff. And so a lot of the kids, you know, that I went to school with were farmers' children. And Dad had some sheep when I was little. So just, you know, small holdings, small numbers, some sort of Welsh ewes, and bred some Welsh mules, and had a few pedigree rouge and stuff. And a sheepdog. So my dad obviously wanted a sheepdog. And so he bought me for Christmas a sheepdog puppy when I was like, I don't know how big I was, but not big enough to train or do anything with a sheepdog puppy. But it was like, oh, here, son, here's your dog. And then Dad trained it. But that was my sort of, so I was around farming as a child, but not from a farming background. And then foot and mouth came, and kind of that ended. And I went off to university in Edinburgh. And as a teenager, I was pretty left of centre, bit of a tearaway. And then I went up to university in Edinburgh, and I went and did anthropology. So nothing to do with farming, and social anthropology. And I did a degree up there and a master's, and did a lot of traveling, which kind of came with the territory. Went all over the place, and ended up living in Hungary, lived in Czech Republic for a little bit, and then lived in Hungary and Budapest for a while, where I ran a backpackers hostel and taught English and just generally dicked about. But I had a great time. So so through that period of my life, I was just always off having adventures, doing different things. And I was very lucky. My parents were kind of quite used to it and just sort of let me get on with whatever adventures I was doing. As long as I'm quite lucky I fell into stuff in education that I quite enjoyed. So like the anthropology stuff was really interesting. Anyway, so I came back to the UK and started working, doing a couple of things. One was working for a local like youth and community service, which kind of I ended up in a school, sort of in a counsellor's role, probably grossly underqualified, really looking back, but counselling kids in a school that I thought was going to be like, oh, someone stole my pencil case, or someone's called me a name. And it was more like, you know, quite hardcore kind of like drug abuse, sexual abuse, like some pretty nasty stuff. And it was the front line. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but Dad's background is in social pedagogy and lecturing.
Sorry, social what?
Sorry, social pedagogy, which is like kind of European sort of social work, working with children and young people. It's sort of stuff where you have like the Steiner schools, the Montessori schools, forest schools, that sort of end of social work. Do you know what I mean?
It was the word I learned last Oxford Real Farming Conference. I bought a book and never read it.
To be a pedagogue. Yeah, so a pedagogue's a bit of a catch-all term, I suppose. So if you were in Denmark or Norway and you were somebody who worked with young people, with old people, in some sort of social capacity with people, you would have a degree in pedagogy. Like if you worked in one of their care homes, children's care homes, you would have a degree and you'd be a pedagogue. Here, you'd have gone to the job centre and not wanted to do anything else, and they'd have gone, hey, do you want to work with children in a care home? We'll give you 6 weeks training. Or whatever, you know, if you go and work in an old people's home, you have to have a degree qualification in Denmark, you know, all these. And so the pedagogy covers that kind of social worker, youth worker kind of role, I suppose.
And it's a lot of it is about the practice of teaching, isn't it? So how do people learn? What's the best way to teach type of approach?
So it's about, so a big thing that I learned from it was like in terms of with children and young people, it's about seeing the capability of the young person, you know, so that like the forest schools model, like it's not like, hey, don't touch the sword, don't touch the knife, don't touch the hammer, don't do this. It's like you're perfectly capable at the age of 8 to saw a bit of wood up and use nails and a hammer without chopping your hands off. But we need to enact a learning and teaching environment that allows that to happen in a safe way. And there's a real, I mean, there's you could go on forever. There's a really interesting TED talk by a guy called Siddhartha Mitra called Build a School in the Clouds, which talks about basically having a school which is the lights come on automatically and it's staffed over Zoom basically by some British grandmothers who go, that's amazing. Can you tell me more about that? Like, how did you do that? And he basically put a computer in a wall in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere in India and had little kids who didn't speak English particularly well and this, that, and the other, explaining DNA replication within X amount of time by just giving them the access to Google and asking them some questions. And it, like, you know, the innate ability of people and young people and children and stuff to learn and to grow and develop is is amazing, but our education system and a lot of our social care systems don't really allow that. Like if you look at Scandinavia, kids who go to social care, the number of them that come out with positive outcomes and get married and have meaningful jobs and lives is great. And in the UK, like most of them don't. And a lot of it's to do with...
I heard yesterday, we're in this country, you're more likely to end up in prison than get a degree or something like that.
Yeah. It's just mental. And the whole way that we treat children and young people in schools, schools in this country are kind of an institution, aren't they, to create this type of person that fits into a system. And they're getting a lot better, but like our education system is it is a massive move. Like I know a lot of people are sort of home educating their children and seeking alternative educational provision and stuff like that. And that's basically because they don't really have a massive faith in the system to create the kind of young people that they want to see their children become, I guess, which is really sad. But yeah, that's so I went into anthropology and ended up doing social pedagogy, and I'm quite into, I don't massively like people, but I've always found it quite interesting. And it broke my heart working with the kids. Like it was horrendous. Like it was amazing, but I have never heard so many sad stories. And it's that thing of like the evil that people do, like the shit that people can do to other human beings. And in the case of where I was working with the kids I was working, an awful lot of time it was people like their loved ones, their family members. I dealt with a lot of like sexual abuse, kids disclosing sexual abuse to me from family members and stuff like that. And I won't go into it too much because some of it's pretty grim, but and the system just fails them, because the system's biggest concern is, why are you kicking off in class and being a dick? Because we've got shit to do. Sit down, shut up. You're disrupting the place. And they'd get sent to me because the class didn't really want them there. And then they'd basically disclose that this awful stuff is happening. And it was like, oh, well, now they're a problem, and now you're kind of a drain on it. It just, like, the good outcomes were down to, and I'm not saying like I was particularly amazing, but the good outcomes were down to the individual relationships between people who did that job or people who did that sort of work, police officers, all sorts of things. Like it was down to the individual. The system wasn't amazing, but within the system, there were lots of amazing individuals I met who did, like, lots of them voluntary, youth clubs, like youth projects and stuff like that, doing amazing stuff, usually short-term funding or grant funding. So I went to the town where I used to work, and it was a really good project. I went to see it the other day and it wasn't there. It was like, oh, it's really sad, because that was a major source of kind of support for kids. So I did that. It wasn't very good, but it was rewarding in a lot of ways. And then I was also working as a gamekeeper on the side. So I've always liked outdoorsy stuff. I've always hunted, fished, shot, been into that kind of stuff.
But James, just go back. But in that, with the work you did with kids, how did you protect yourself? Because that's like heart. As you said, it was heartbreaking stuff. And how did you?
So I was kind of like young. So the stuff about, like, the bad stuff that they were experiencing was awful, but I was young enough that I probably just got angry about it, as you do. Do you know what I mean? And raged against it. And I probably didn't think at the time about how much that affected me. I got very pissed off. Like, what got me was being in a system of like somebody's really, 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 really interested in the statistical like sheet, like, please take 2 days out of working with these kids because you really need to fill in this like paperwork for something. And then, oh, sorry, the grant funding's ended for this project. And you know what I mean? Angry about the system. But at the time, I probably didn't think about it. It probably did affect me down the line. Like, I think it's probably affected quite a lot of the way that I look at, like, I don't have children yet. But yeah, it's probably affected quite a lot of the way I look at that sort of stuff. But at the time, it didn't massively affect me. Where it got difficult was just feeling like you couldn't really make a massive difference. Like, I remember a kid saying to me, all this stuff is great, but the easiest way and the best way out of this is just to sell drugs, make money, and fuck off. And you were like, well, yes, like, it's not, but I can see how you putting all this massive effort in to get a shitty job in Tesco stacking shelves, living in this estate that you'll never get out of, while the guy next door is driving a Beamer. Yeah, I can't. Like, some of you will get out, lots of you won't. And it's just like Russian dolls. mothers within daughters within mothers. Like they used to think I was like, I was in my early 20s, and they were like, "You're really old, sir." What do you mean? Well, you don't have any kids. You're like 25 and you haven't got children. Like, what is wrong with you? It just, yeah. There was like 50 something languages spoken in the school. So there was sort of all sorts of stuff going on.
I suppose an outlet was your gamekeeping. So
and I like, that's the thing I was going to say before. So I really like the countryside is my thing. So I was working in a town, in a city, in a school with a lot of people. And then how do I protect myself? I go for a walk with my dogs. I basically get out. That's always been the same thing. Always just like whatever else is happening, I've always been able to take my dogs, go and wander around. Just the world is an incredibly beautiful place. It's not a lot of the time. You spend an awful lot of time thinking, oh, it's terrible. But actually, when you go out and stand outside and look around, it is a pretty amazing, beautiful, wonderful place. And, I'm sitting on my truck here now and the sort of sun's going down a bit. The light's quite nice. There's birds flying around and, this, that, and the other. And yeah, that's it. I've always just been able to switch off by kind of having that escape. And that's always been since a little child. Like whenever I've ever had a problem or had a falling out with my parents or anything, I've just taken one of the dogs and buggered off for a walk. Gone and played in the woods, gone and done whatever, climbed trees, dammed streams as a little kid. And that's probably why I got into farming, because that's the bit of the world that I quite enjoy, far more so than sitting in a high school in Newport in South Wales, listening to all the ills of the world. So that was the defining, probably directional choice in life.
Right, and you mentioned dogs, and there is a slight hoarding tendency, because how many have you got at the moment?
Well, I've probably got something like 13, 14 dogs, if I was totally honest. I palm a few off, like there's 4 staying at my parents', a couple that are kind of shared with my other half, but yeah, I've got a lot of dogs. Got 6 collies there, I think, or 6 sheep and cattle dogs there. There's 3 terriers and a terrier pup. There's a couple of 3 lurchers. So I have quite a collection of dogs.
And I suppose it's a question that Nick and I always come, because your first you mentioned you haven't got, your dad had some sheep, but you're not necessarily from farming background.
Yeah, no, definitely not from farming background, no.
So I'm always intrigued by this urge to farm. Like you have this desire to want to farm, and I know you like nature and you love dogs, but there's also something else about it. So
it's a funny thing, right? So when I grew up, I wanted to be like, when I actually wanted to be something before really thinking about it, I just wanted to be like, as a kid, I wanted to be an explorer and all that sort of stuff. And then I never really knew what I wanted to be. And I went through time sort of saying I wanted to do things that sounded good or pleased my mum. So for a while I was like, I want to be a vet because I like animals. That's a good job. I did my work experience as a vet, and it was like dealing with Mrs. Jones's sick hamster. It just didn't. And I suppose with farming, I didn't have a massive urge to do it before I ended up sort of doing it, if that makes sense. Like I was around it, and I was around the keeping, around the farming, and I just thought, oh, I've got a bit of time, I'll have a go at this. And then I really liked it.
And what did you like? What
and I think it's the being tied into like the cycles of the seasons and the cycles of the world. And there is something incredibly rewarding about producing livestock, animals, dogs. Like I love my dogs. I don't particularly want to farm puppies. It's very nice the terriers I've got are bred, mother to daughter, but it's obviously a lot slower process because I don't need a dog very often. And there's something nice about that. I bought some sheep. It was quite nice fun, being outside, using a sheepdog, training that, but then having that first crop of lambs and watching them grow and then being like, oh, they're mine. I've bred those and selecting those lambs. And then, oh, that's a really nice one. And then I'm going to have some, and just, it's that process of that's the rewarding thing of working with livestock. I don't know. It's just one of those things, isn't it? It gets into your skin. Like, I couldn't be an arable farmer. I just have no real interest. It's working with livestock, producing livestock, that kind of connection between, and I've been very, very lucky because I didn't come from a traditional farming background. I didn't go to agriculture college, and I basically did a little bit of it with some sheep on an entirely grass-based system type thing, because I had grass and sheep, and I probably met the right people. And then very quickly, within the first few years of farming in my own right, I ended up at King's Clear Estates, which we'll kind of come to. And I got to see into that world of like regenerative, grass-based, large-scale livestock, and just what you can do. You know, the fact that you can produce this stock, and it's that whole cycle. I'm probably explaining it really, really, really badly, but there was something about sort of taking some ground, looking after the ground, seeing the ground sort of thrive on that yearly cycle and watching it sort of change, and then taking livestock and kind of building a system that matches, that works. And the system I've always run has always been very natural. Like, we've always lambed outside, sort of springtime, May, that sort of thing. And just kind of like playing God with nature a little bit, and then watching those animals just do it. And it's the same with the dogs. Like, I love working dogs. Like, I really like dogs, but I really like working dogs because I love watching a dog do what it was bred for, and that instinctive genetic predisposition. Like, I've got 2 pups that I've kept back that I bred, and I took them out to sheep. They're like 5 months old, never seen sheep before, let them go, and they just went out around that field and started bringing a mob of sheep together. And they didn't know what they were doing, and then they just ended up running around them in the middle of the field. And it's just that kind of, taking a 6-month-old, 8-month-old terrier pup and lifting a bale of hay, and a rat runs out, and it's grabs the rat and shakes it, and it's just there's something about that. And then you kind of extrapolate that into the sheep, and it's that I bought some really good sheep to start with. I was lucky. I bought some sheep off Tim White. I bought some ex-Lanas. And so that first lambing was like, I was very lucky because I didn't really know what I was doing. And they were lambing. I bought some old ewes, some ewe lambs, and they had lambs, and they mothered lambs, and they just had lambs. They were great. And they were doing this amazing natural thing. It was like in front of me. And then I was like, the lambs that I bred did the same. And then I just got a bit hooked and trying to breed the best sheep I could. And it just, I tell everyone I hate lambing because I deal really badly with stuff dying. So it really upsets me. It doesn't matter how many sheep I have. It really annoys me when I feel like I've missed something or dropped a bollock and something's died. So lambing's always stressful, but it's amazing driving around and just watching sheep, just like popping lambs out, rearing lambs, looking after themselves. I probably I wouldn't pull more than 10 lambs, being realistic, and some of those would be freaks out of how many lambs are born, 1,200, 1,500 lambs are born, something like that. It just fascinates me. So like working with like good livestock and genetics, and then because I got lucky where I kind of started off some of my large scale farming career, having that understanding of kind of soil and plants and all that stuff. It's just, it fascinates me. The natural world. And I guess it's...
So you being in a shed at lambing time, right, highly intensive lambing spot, plus lots of people, idea of hell.
It's something I will do if someone pays me well enough, but it just does, it's just, I don't get it. It's really stressful. Like it's just, it seems massively unnatural. So like, I mean, I can kind of like swallow my own thing, because certain people, I get quite a lot of flack for saying like, I say stuff which you've seen on Instagram that people get quite upset for. And one day I made a comment about indoor lambing in a shed being quite unnatural and this, that, and the other. And I got absolutely hammered by a lot of people who indoor lamb, saying that I was sort of suggesting that they were cruel. And obviously sheep get used to being, lots of sheep are very happy and content inside. You put my sheep inside and they hate it. They don't eat, and I just find the whole concept of like chasing sheep around a pen, like as a sheep starts to lamb and you're like, she's lambing, better rugby tackle her to the ground and whip the lamb out of her and chase her around the pen and drag her lambs up the feed passageway and shove her in a small pen and check her every 5 minutes stood next to her. And it's like the most unnatural thing. Sheep do get used to it, but it's just not for me. And I don't think, I don't think it probably sells a great image sometimes of the industry. I remember just talking to someone over this last lambing, and they said, "Oh yeah, if she starts lambing, I'll just pull it out. There's no point pissing about." And you're like, like they are, and I'm going to sound really hippie, but they are pretty smart, sentient beings. And the one thing they are really good at, sheep, is, or should be, is that bit. Like they try and die the rest of the year, but I'm always amazed by how good, like, sheep are maternally, generally, if you leave them alone and, you haven't bred them for totally the wrong traits. So yeah, I understand why people do it, but I would never. I'd probably rather stop farming sheep than have to lamb my sheep inside, if I'm honest.
But it's your point, which is this is the connection to nature, isn't it? They're doing the job they should be doing. You're there as the stockman, but actually minimum interference. They're just getting on with stuff. Yeah,
and that is the pleasure in having, that is the pleasure for me in having the sheep. So to take that away, most of my lambing round involves standing on top of a quad bike with a pair of binoculars, playing like sheep safari, and within about a week or so, I lose track of what's had a lamb where, and I just drive around looking for problems. And effectively, if they're getting on with it, they just get not ignored, but they just get left to it. And yeah, I'm constantly sat there quite often in the we lamb sort of May and the weather's quite nice. Sat there in the evening, sun going down, watching some sheep out on one of the little peninsulas on the marsh. Like the birds, and we've got a lot of birds being an RSPB marsh, singing. And yeah, I just think it's not a bad place to be a sheep, as opposed to being wedged in a little pen and having your lambs sort of tugged out of you, stuck in trailers, dragged around, put out. Like I said, each their own, and everyone, different systems of different farms. But that is why I farm, really.
And James, just remind us whereabouts you are. Where is the marsh?
So this is an interesting question. So the main marsh that we've got is in Essex. So it's on a place called Blackwater Estuary. It's an RSPB reserve. And it's about 9. Well, it's not. We rent about 900 acres, of which we don't graze all of it all of the time because it's in various sort of HLS type stewardship schemes, and also it's obviously very wet at certain times of the year. And then we have another farm which is about 45 minutes from that, which is another piece of marsh and some arable ground that has been sort of it's been put into what we call kind of GS4, but it's not GS4 anymore, is it? But herbal lays, and that is going into now. We've just been renting it for the first year, but we're going to go into a share farming partnership there with the landowner, who is interested in taking that sort of, it's a very coastal arable farm, and putting it into a regenerative livestock model. And then we've got a bunch of ground in Hampshire, which is where I'm sat now, around sort of Hampshire and Wiltshire borders, which is obviously a monumental pain in the arse because it's about 2.5 hours drive between the two areas, which isn't ideal. And people always say to me, "You must love driving," and it's how it's worked out. It's certainly far from ideal. So,
but do you see this? Well, with your share farming, there's going to be more opportunities in that East Anglia route.
So I've always been of the opinion that the eastern counties, the further east you go, the more opportunities there are, because there's less livestock, and there's all these arable farms with all these cover crops and blah blah blah. The only downside is now with the change to the SFI rules, lots and lots and lots of those cover crops they don't want grazed. So we've got loads of cover crops around us, most of which they don't want grazed livestock. It also happens to be where I am quite heavy clay. I think there's quite a lot of mileage on the marsh ground, but what I'm having a difficulty with where I am now is we've probably got a lot of summer grazing and we're quite short of winter keep, just because of those. If you go back 8 years, not 7, 8, 9 years, we could get so many turnips. And so you just ruck sheep everywhere on crap grazing until September, put them on a bit of Haley's ground, and then just put everything on turnips. used lambs a lot, and it was all fine. Now we're looking at more of these like greening crops, the mixed greening crops. Some of them are in schemes that they can't be grazed till the 15th of January, and then they want you off by February, and yada. So there is quite a lot of opportunity in the East, and it's probably somewhere going forward, that I could see me centralizing more of my business, but the pieces aren't quite in place there yet. Like I could do with finding a large dry area of cover crops. It's about this time of year. I think with probably most sheep and cattle farmers find the same thing. We're fine up until about January, and then January, February, March become a little bit sticky. And then it grows a lot of grass around there in the spring.
So James, you're farming at a pretty big scale now. Time-wise, how have you done it? In without going into loads and loads of detail, but how have you done it? And were there key people along the way? Or? Yeah.
So the honest answer is the hard way, like badly probably is the honest answer. So I skipping forward to the stuff when I was at Wales, I ended up basically moving to Hampshire, moved to a place called Kingsclear Estates, took on a role there, which was an employed role through somebody else who'd taken on a contract to manage some livestock, and that progressed into an employed role with the estate, and then a share farming thing and contract managing their stock, and then eventually replacing my own stock. And that was probably, so moving from Wales to Hampshire and going to Kingsclear Estates and working with Tim May was probably like the biggest single change. And it's kind of funny because sometimes I joke about like my farming has been a sort of tale of two Tims, really. So I met Tim White early on, and that got me into the ex-Lana sheep and the kind of sheep I keep and the kind of sheep system I run and all that. So that was like, I think I know how to farm sheep now. And I do know how to farm sheep. Like there is a way to farm sheep and make money. And then I met Tim May when I went to Kingsclear, and I was like, now I understand how to farm land now. And there is a way to farm land to make money. And there is a way to farm sheep and cattle on land in a way that benefits both of them and makes a lot of money. My issue has been that I have never really had security, which is the other issue with being down in this part of the world. It's all big estates, with a lot of the political and taxation stuff that's gone on. Nobody really wants to tenant anything out. So I spent a decade on grazing licenses, and that has meant I've fallen foul to. So we moved from Kingsclear. There was a sort of expanding dairy operation, and we moved from Kingsclear to an estate next door who wanted to do a regenerative agriculture project, herbal lays, all that. And then overnight they decided they want to rewild it and replace us with a couple of beavers. And then the sheep went somewhere else and somewhere else. And this is how I ended up in Essex, because that came up, and it was either sell the sheep and I probably, looking back, should have sold the sheep, because the trade was high and I was emotionally attached to the flock of sheep I had, because it's like, it's mine, my baby, what I've built. And I probably should have flogged all the sheep, got a massive chunk of money, gone on a holiday for a bit, come back, taken on the ground in Essex and just stuffed it full of cows, and then become a farmer of cows. But I bounced the sheep around the countryside, took the sheep to Essex, sold a bunch of sheep because we were running a lot more. And that's kind of where I am now. And that's why I've got ground in Hampshire, ground in Essex, mostly summer grazing in Essex and winter grazing here. And in terms of people, my very long suffering parents have probably been my greatest supporters and listening ear, and there to pick the pieces up a few times when things have gone somewhat awry, mainly with emotional support and telling me to man up. Like the right level of like, do you need a cuddle, or do you need to be told to like man the fuck up and get on with things? So yeah, no, I'm very, very, very lucky.
But you'll have had some, I'm imagining like short winter days, sheep in different counties, wet weather. You'll have had some over that decade. Was it a decade?
Yeah.
You'll have had some real shit times. What kept you going?
So I'll be totally honest. So I have had at least one major mental breakdown, and I've had some other sort of smaller ones. And I just had like, it's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to admit. but probably one of the biggest motivations that's kept me going has been, I just have this, like, I don't want to quit. I don't want to admit defeat. I don't want to, like, pride, which is a terrible thing. Like, a lot of what's kept me going has been pride, not wanting to let people down, wanting to prove to people that, you know, not just prove to like naysayers, but prove to people like my folks and stuff like that I can do it. And if I'm totally honest, there have probably been times when I would have been better admitting like this ain't working and reassessing. And sometimes I've done things the hard way. I've sort of bloody mindedly kind of like pushed ahead in a war of attrition at times. But in terms of like the things that kept me going, is I've been very lucky. Like, my dogs have been a massive source of, like, you know, again, it can be a really, 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 really shitty time, but you go out and work the dogs, you know, like that sort of stuff. That's what kind of keeps you going. And I suppose because, like, what else is there? Like, I have a bit of a, like, when I first started farming, I had this idea that I was going to buy a farm, which is very naive. I have now subsequently learned over farming for the last 15 years and 10 years since I moved down to this part of the world, that I'm probably not going to make enough money to buy a farm, certainly not a big enough farm to put all my sheep on and make a living off. But I can probably make enough to get somewhere to, you know, have a house, have a bit of ground and set myself up. And, you know, one day I'd like to have children, and I'm very lucky. I've got an incredibly supportive partner. And I guess it's that, you know, I would like to, it's an adventure. It's a blast. Like, I'm not really a quitter. I keep thinking, like, I'm kind of an optimist. I think just a little bit further, right, and we'll crack this and it'll be awesome. It is awesome. But also, I just, you know, if I can get to the end of it and I've bought a little bit of ground, place to live, you know, and sit there, and I've had, and like, don't get me wrong, I have a pretty good life. So I do things, I have hobbies, I have interests, I go places, I go on holiday, I do interesting stuff because life is too short not to. So I try not to be a complete slave to it. And yeah, it's just what I do, I suppose.
And you mentioned the finances.
Yeah, it sucks. Like, the biggest difficulty is cash. Like, you know, I've got like over 100 grand's worth of lambs running around right now. If I sell them at, you know, the projected prices. And other bits and bobs. But yeah, I've got no money. And like, I got a load of lambs with long tails and balls that are like wool shedders. So if I sell them at the stores, I'm going to get like fairly well stitched up, and I just hate it because it's just like, you know. So it's that thing, isn't it, about, you know, asset rich, cash poor. But yeah, the thing I've learned, if I had to say to people like who are getting into farming or new entrants or first generation farmers, it's just all about the generation of cash. Like, I started and I thought the most important thing was to like build up like genetics and have this best flock and have all this stuff that was great. And it's just cash. Like, you know, because I've regeneratively farmed ground that I've then lost a year later. So I don't see the benefit anyway. Do you know what I mean? I've built up amazing genetic merit in sheep that I've then had to sell and this, that, and the other. And trying to keep a constant positive cash flow is the hardest thing. You know, we had the blue tongue thing. And so, you know, we got to just about when we start selling lambs, 100 odd yearlings there used to sell, a load of rams, shearling rams to sell. Blue tongue turns up, can't sell anything. No cash coming in. Doesn't matter what those sheep are worth. They're sat there, and you're like, as a first generation farmer, there isn't a massive pile of money behind. There isn't a subsidy. There isn't environment payments. Like, all of my money comes from the stuff I sell on the hoof. That's it. Like I make my living from selling like meat animals. There isn't any diversification. There's no pods or glamping. There's no like other stuff that I can do. There's no other money. There's no other payments coming in. So, you know, I sell the last of my lambs in, let's say, March. And then I don't have any income really from the sheep anyway, until we start selling stuff, you know, later on that summer. And in this case, with the blue tongue thing knackering it, I haven't really had any meaningful income since probably like end of March, start of April last year. Because we had, you know, we'd have had 60, 70 grand's worth of sales, like ewe lambs and stuff, like ready to go. And shearing rams that just like stopped. And like you can kind of weather that if you've got more resilience to weather that if you're a more established business. So that is the hardest thing about it, the finances. Like you can make money off it, but the lack of security, the lack of being able to build a system, like, you know, you give me an arable farm that says, here's 1,000 acres of cover crops that you will have from this date to this date, and you can graze them for the duration of that time, and they will be there, and this will be the price. I can make you money out of them. But I can't make you money out of them if you say, well, just ring me in November, and I'll let you know what's there. There might be 50 acres, there might be 500 acres. Oh, can you just come with, like, graze these 500 acres off in 3 weeks? So you need to bring 5,000 lambs. Well, it cost me £3 each way to haul them in a lot. You know, we seem to be providing as graziers in this part of the world a lot of time like a service, but we're the ones expected to foot the bill. It's the same with the RSPB thing. Like I'm delivering conservation grazing, certain outcomes, but I have to weather the risk. It's the same with all the cover crop grazing or the other being a grazier. It's we need you to graze this, come, and then bugger off. So trying to piece it together in a cohesive business and sell things at the right time of year or have things in the right order, that becomes a little bit tricky.
And when do you think that I occasionally talk about it like it is coming, which is this idea that actually is as a service provider you're being rewarded for that? Because I don't think it will come if schemes have to have livestock grazing within them. At the moment, it's still choice, isn't it? So all of a sudden, in Essex, I'm guessing there's not that many people who want to rock up with 1,000 lambs and go, right, then let's do it.
No, exactly. So I think that's the model. Like the issue at the moment is there's always somebody else who's like the same way as other people will pay more. So cover crops have gone up and up and up and up and up to the point where people are like, I'll pay you £1.50 a head a week. And you're like, it just doesn't add up. There's probably always somebody else who will come in and you know, offer to do it for free if you had a business getting paid for it. But I think there's definitely, like, I speak to a few people. You look at bits in America, you look at bits in Europe, like flood defense in Holland stuff, fire break grazing in California. There are lots of places in the world where, you know, grazing to deliver an outcome using animals as a management tool is paid. And I think, you know, there's a few people. There's a guy who's grazing management, Alex, and his partner, whose name I forget, but they're based in Monmouthshire. And they do various things. So I think definitely that is coming, or certainly like some of the more sensible estates are probably thinking we'd rather work with one person year on year, have a really good relationship. And I'll be quite glad of it, to be fair. The issue is less, I don't mind paying for it. Like I've got no issue paying for cover crops. It works. The biggest issue is the timescales, is the sort of, oh, can you just turn up and then can you just go away again? I think we've had this conversation before, Liz, about all these arable estates saying we want lambs at certain times of year, but none of them are willing to put in X amount of grass over the summer to allow for somebody to come in and put a share model in. And
the SFI doesn't encourage you, or it encourages you to get the biggest number in terms of the biggest payment, not construct a system that works in terms of where do they magically disappear in the middle of February when you want to drill some spring barley?
Yes, so, exactly that.
And so that until there's a bit more, the infamous joined up, or people putting, it's linking stuff together, or is there areas of permanent pasture that are accessible and all of that? But that's a very case by case perspective.
Yeah, and it's also understanding, like we have conversations with people. It's like, well, you know, if you want me to buy like these really small long keep lambs that are going to be here this time of year, for example, then I've got to finish them. It can't just be like, right, cover crops are done now, bugger off. And you like, I've now got shitloads of Swaledale. Like I'm now in Hampshire with loads of like 3/4 finished Swaledales with horns and balls. Like, oh, I'll just rock up into Cirencester Market with 1,000 Swaledale lambs and just give them. You know what I mean? It's understanding both sides of the business. And I think, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's probably quite a lot of arable farms who don't know a huge amount about the livestock kind of model. And hopefully maybe we'll see, but we've been saying this about like, hopefully we'll see more share farming models. Hopefully we'll see more sort of share farming deals. But I mean, people have been saying this for like 10 years, like, oh, it's going to come now in a minute. It's going to come now. And all these farms are suddenly going to go for like long-term deals. But
But I was talking to someone the other day, and they're now working on the fact is that SFI it will disappear. Doing that as the incentive piece will disappear, and so what the SFI has done is developed more short-term thinking, which is we're now running on a 2 to 3 year cycle based on how to maximize income. So his movement is going, actually, it's a bonus, but actually we've got to establish a rotation that will work when those payments don't exist. And so that is a rare thinking, but it's out there. And he's also got an opportunity where, again, we've talked before, which is part of the challenge in some of these really high arable areas, is there's nobody that's got any experience of looking after sheep. While he's in a situation where he's got 2 or 3 people who have experience of looking after livestock. So all of a sudden you see this massive scalable model where you've got someone who actually is more interested in what benefits those livestock are going to do for land rather than chasing payments, and you've got someone with some skilled workers.
When I came down to the southeast, you just said about a massive scalable thing. My little eyes lit up because I looked at all these estates. Like, I come from Wales, the average farm's like 60 acres or something around me. Do you know what I mean? I came here and I was like,
which farm site? The field size in Essex.
They're like, Hampshire was like where we were. It was like 100 acre average field. There's grass everywhere. And I was like, oh, we're going to be millionaires. We're going to be rich, because I had this idea that we, like you said, joined up, scalable. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's thousands of acres here. There's thousands of acres. But it doesn't quite work out like that. You know?
Yeah.
It's not. Yes. And I think you hit the nail on the head of, it's different types of, it's thinking, it's individual, it's down to, like, you're talking about that chap, that mindset, having that mindset of longer term strategy, maybe.
Yeah. And that fits with ownership of land, doesn't it? It's not about, you're not in a transient, or they're a farm manager that's having to defend some of those decisions. So and that's the infamous context piece, isn't it? It's all very much dependent on all of these things happening at once. But that now is a beacon of hope that it's out there. And if we can get that model working, then others can see it. Yeah.
It's a bit like, so the chap that I do some stuff with in Essex, so the second farm, it's lovely. Like, it's a really lovely, peaceful arrangement, because I deal with a guy that owns the ground, and we have a conversation, walk around and go, reckon you should have a gate there. If we fence that like that, it's like a gate there and a gate there, that would make life a lot easier. Oh, is this lay? Like, we have an actual relationship, and we're going to share farming degree. Everywhere else I deal with, it's like you've got layers of like, some, in a lot of places I never ever meet the owner. I never speak to the owner. They probably don't know I exist, really. And then you are more at the mercy of changing fashions, changing tides, changing staff. I'm very aware that my relationship where I am with the RSPB ground I've got, there's a manager there, we get on well. That could change in a year's time. I could get a different manager. It might not be the same relationship. The RSPB policy might change for the better or for the worse, or, there's always all these different things, like you said. And I think that if you can find and build relationships with the landowner, like with Tim May at Kingsclear Estates, you look at all the pitch up stuff they've got there, that kind of stuff, it's, I hate to say it because I've probably upset a few land agents, but it does work a lot better when you have that direct communication kind of relationship with the person who has a vested interest in the ground, and they have a passion to actually, like, deliver and improve and do whatever else, rather than it just be, we should be doing this, it looks good, doesn't it?
And it's moving towards collaboration rather than it's like, this is a dramatic statement, but it's like serfdom, isn't it? You're at the whim of whoever's there, and you're holding so much risk in that business, as you said, in terms of cash flow and all of that. So it's recognizing that within that relationship that everybody's got to have a bit of skin in the game, rather than all of the risk being on the grazier.
That's a massive thing. Like, we were talking about the cover crop. Like, I've had times where someone said, right, yeah, cool, you got to get the sheep off now, we want to do something with it. You're like, but I thought I had it to, whatever time. Nah, change of plan. And I've had to sell those lambs to stores. And, you go, well, instead of getting £120 a head, I'm now getting £70 a head. So I'm losing £50 a head, which is all right over 20 lambs. But over, like, say, 600 lambs in a group like that, you're like, well, there goes tens of thousands of pounds that I was projecting. Like, haven't lost, but I was projecting because I thought, and yeah, having skin in the game. I've changed a lot as well. So when I first started farming, I was very much more like, what do I need to do to get this ground? What do I need to say? What do I need to agree to? What do I need to say? Like, yep, we can do whatever you want, however you want it, because I was desperate for the ground. And now I'm a lot more realistic to say, do you know what? Like, I need this and I need it like that. And I will deliver like a service to you, as it were. And I will pay you for it. But there have got to be certain caveats or parameters to that. You know, I need the cover crops this time or whatever. But that's just probably learning as well. That's an age thing.
So, James, I want to talk. Well, I want to ask you what you thought about carbon calling, honestly. Not that you wouldn't be honest, but what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so my mate Nikki Oxall, who's obviously been coming to carbon calling for a few years because she's based in Scotland and has always said, you must come up, it's brilliant. And so this year I made the sort of journey up, and I just thought it was brilliant. It was so refreshing to go somewhere where every person there was sort of had a vested interest in, really wanted to share and participate and learn. And I liked the fact that it was almost like one group of people. You know, you from sort of the mealtime stuff to the sessions, it was a really inclusive environment. And I just felt like I kind of spoke a little bit to everybody and learned something from everybody. And it was a small enough environment that I kind of, by the end of it, knew, oh yeah, that's that guy who does this, and this is that guy that does that. And you'd be speaking to somebody else, and they'd say something else to me. You'd be like, oh yeah, you should go and speak to that guy over there because he's the guy that knows about tree guards, or he's the guy. And it was just really nice. You know, I really enjoyed Groundswell, but it's got a lot bigger. There's a lot more people there, you know, from the industry and influencers and sort of, you know, from. Yeah. And I thought it was that really nice grassroots farmer-led community feeling. And I mean, it's a lovely, like you guys are a lovely team of people, and a nice family, and it's a nice farm. It's a nice setting. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was really good. It could have been longer, but that's only because I didn't really want to go home.
Oh, don't worry, we've made it longer. This year is longer.
Amazing. But yeah, no, I genuinely thought it was brilliant. And it's one of these sort of strange catch 22 is the right word, but it would be great to have even more people there. But then you obviously get to a point eventually, don't you, where I mean it can do a lot of growing, do you know what I mean, and get more and more and more people. But one of the things I really loved was that community. So the challenge for you guys as it goes forward, because no doubt it will grow and it will develop and it will expand, is I guess keeping that kind of community vibe. Like it was stuff like the meal times and stuff, which is really nice. You know, having one meal that we all go to and sort of get food together and eat together in one space was obviously, you know, a slightly different vibe than things like Groundswell.
Yeah, I suppose our intent is to do Groundswell early days where it was that. That's what I'm trying not to say, is basically it felt like Groundswell used to before it got much bigger. And Groundswell has it, and its influence on that number of people is incredible. But it's not quite where I don't have the ambition to get to that point. Certainly,
no. And it was just it was good. And also, like, I mean, Northern people are good fun. Like it's definitely always a good crowd. It's a good crowd. The bagpipes were a particularly nice touch. Although I hear they're Northumberland pipes, not Scottish pipes.
I don't know. They're Scottish pipes. But we're recording this, James, on the 2nd of January. On the 31st of January, the said piper was so he'd been so active on the old ale. He had a very hard job to play at 12 o'clock. So he did, but it wasn't great. It was a little messy. No, that's really amazing. Well, it's just nice for Liz and I to hear that about carbon calling, because that's our aim, but it does kind of take it out of us, and we're always trying to keep it slightly fresh.
Yeah.
So this year's will be slightly different again.
And we're going midweek to see whether it gets how it changes the numbers. So yeah, we're investigating things anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will be coming back again this year. And I've spoken to, it's it's one of those things. I think it's just it seems like it's a long way if you're down here, just like everything. Do you know what I mean? It's as people from the UK, we've got very bad at being like, oh, it's 5 whole hours drive away. Which
but ironically,
really
it would be probably as close to Nikki. Do you mean in Aberdeenshire to Cumbria?
Yeah. Exactly. Whereas like we're just kind of, when 5 or 6 hours driving isn't very much anyway. Like I go to Essex and back from where I am in Hampshire, and that's like a 5-hour round trip, and it's quite often 6-hour round trip with the traffic. So it's nowhere in the UK is that far, is it? It's you're there in half a day. So it's well worth the drive to get up to there. So I'll definitely be coming back. And the food is exceptional as well, which always helps.
To Janet.
Yeah, the food is very, very good. Yeah, and the bar was very good too. Bar was very good.
Call out to Emma on that front.
Yeah.
And James, just got one last question for me, which is, we've talked right at the beginning about your early days working with kids and on that side, and your love of nature. Do you see where those two can start to? I'm not saying you're about to set up a care farm or you're going to do some wild green prescribing, but could you see yourself in doing a bit more of that?
Oh, there's so many things I would like to do. Like, this is one of the biggest tragedies, is that if I had somehow got lucky enough to just end up with a fixed base, a farm, a secure base, then I think a lot of the things I do would probably have been slightly less time consuming. Like, I do a lot of running around, and these other things like working with children, forest schools, that sort of stuff. Like, I'd love to do more of that sort of stuff, but it's just having time, and it's my bread and butter, as I said before, is just producing red meat, lambs and sheep. And we talked a lot about sheep, but we've sort of, since we've gone to Essex, we've built a beef thing as well, and some water buffalo. And I really hope in the future that I can find myself in a position to have a little bit more time to put my mind to some of these other diversifications, because I'd love to, that teaching kids and educating kids is amazing. It's brilliant. And I think there is a lot of scope, and adults too. We've looked into quite a lot into doing various education stuff with adults. So yeah, it's definitely, there's a whole load of diversifications like that I would love to do. But it's just the time. Like, so much of my time is dead time driving around at the moment. So perhaps if I manage to centralize things a bit more and lose a bit of that driving time, then I might be able to put it to better use.
I just wanted to ask you, James, and I don't want to kind of, I think a lot of people see you on social media, and some people will have a perception of you, because you can be quite not aggro. You're
yes, I can be quite aggro,
but I pretty much always agree with you. I
can come across like a bit of a prick.
But I think you talk a huge amount of sense.
The problem is people get really emotional, and I do too. It's part of the human condition. But a lot of the time, if you just take a step back and look at things objectively and do a bit of research and chat to a few people, you usually come to I'm not extremely intelligent, or like some amazing critical thinker. It's just most of the time when people are ranting about stuff on social media, I just go and have a look it up, speak to a few people, read a few bits, and try and form a sensible opinion based upon like a kind of holistic picture. And there's this real thing on social media of like, there is a narrative, and if you step away from it, then you are like not very well accepted sometimes. But what's worrying, and the reason I get a little bit of quite a lot of flack, and I know I can be a bit acerbic, But whenever I say these things and have these rants, be it about inheritance tax or land ownership or whatever, farming, models of farming, I get so many messages from people being like, thank you so much for saying it, because, I didn't know if anyone else really thought that, and we don't really have the balls to say it or whatever. And so that's probably why I carry on. Like, I'm never going to develop a particularly successful social media profile. And I have no real interest in it because I'm not massively palatable. And I had quite an amusing conversation as the supplier of certain handling equipment, who said, we love some of the stuff you post, but we can't really be associated with you because you're too controversial. And I don't think I'm particularly controversial. Like, I'm not like some sort of right-wing neo-Nazi or, like, most of what I say, a lot of it is just sort of trying maybe to help people a little bit. It's not meant so nastily, but I get very frustrated. Like, the industry has huge potential. And some of the stuff, like that stuff with the inheritance tax, I don't want to go down too far on the track. All this stuff about like birthright. So as an industry, we're desperate to convince people to, like, young people, new blood to come in. And then we go on and on about birthright and being born to farm and the right to farm and this sort of stuff. And I'm like, you can't see that's a problem? Or like marching through the middle of London with flags saying, Starmer, you're killing farmers. And like last week, there was a march against major genocides in the same street, or stand there talking about how poor you are next to a $100,000 Land Rover wearing a shuffle and the chemise. And, it's just that, like, it's fine, absolutely fine. But if you're going to get very upset when someone points out the obvious irony or ridiculousness, then I don't know. I got in a load of flack because there's a lot of stuff where people were saying about committing suicide over the removal of APR, and I just said, look, that's a really silly thing to say, because most people who've experienced family suicide would take an inheritance tax bill over family suicide any day of the week. And people got very up in arms because it was like, well, but I'm not. Yeah, it's just sometimes try and provide a bit of balance and a bit of sort of sense. And I think obviously through social media can be quite a hysterical place. People like to be whipped up and whip each other up, and people obviously benefit from that. And sometimes some of the stuff I say is maybe at odds with the party line. So, but yeah, I do. It's amazing how many people sort of agree with it, but it doesn't unfortunately win me many favors.
Well, I think I think when you're just talking to the camera, you're a bit of a natural, and you just, I guess it's from your education and your upbringing and working with kids and stuff, but you're very good at explaining. So, yeah, don't stop being Marmite.
I'd like to do more of it. You see, that's one thing I've always tried to throw my hand a little bit into the kind of consultancy ring, because I'm actually like, I do know what I'm talking about when it comes to farming sheep and these grass-based systems, but I never seem to get a lot of traction. I don't think the dreadlocks help very much, which I've now cut off. But it's the same with the social media game. I quite enjoy. I don't see a lot of people day to day. I have huge numbers of mates, so I've made some amazing connections with people through social media, and I have some great conversations. But I'm under no illusions that Ridgeline are about to ring me up and offer me a brand deal. So yeah, I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy the connections I make with the kind of people that I do make connections with. My dad told me once, he said, be yourself. Lots and lots of people will not like you for it, but the right ones probably will. And he's right. Like I have some great conversations. I've met some great people, and yeah, so that's kind of what that's about. And I just can't help it. When I was that kid in school, I just can't help it. If somebody's talking shit and I think they're talking shit, I can't help but the kid be like, excuse me. And just like be that guy. And I can't help it. And I don't even mean to be nasty. I'm just like, yeah. But didn't you say this last week? And yeah, not always very popular. But no, I'm glad at least you do enjoy it somewhat.
Yeah, no, but my last point is the music on your reels or your stories is amazing. The choices, And does that stem back from your rave days?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm basically Miss Bass. I should be like a superstar DJ, but unfortunately I'm forced to become a farmer. But yeah, so when I was younger, I've always been so into music. And when I went to Edinburgh, I was a little punk kid when I was growing up. And then went to Edinburgh, I was like, there isn't really a punk scene here, but there is a rave scene. I'm now old enough to go to clubs, and it's kind of got a similar anarchic vibe. So I started going out and raving and going to clubs. And I was like, 3 o'clock in the morning at some after party, went, I reckon I could do better than that. Someone went, all right then. So we stayed up until the club opened the next morning and rang them up and booked a night and blah, blah, blah. And the one thing led to another. We ended up, running club nights and raves and a record label. And yeah, it was a very, like, if the James from then met the farming James, they would have some really interesting conversations. And the James from then probably would never have believed that there was sheep farming in the future. But yeah, I've always music's a massive thing for me. And so that's the only reason I got on social media. I was dating somebody, moaning about social media all the time. And they were showed me that you could put music behind videos of my dogs. And I was like, oh, that is awesome. And it took me 2 years to ever actually put my face on, because I was just putting cool music behind videos of sheep and dogs.
This is a formal invitation to James's running the night on Wednesday the 25th at Carbon Calling of June. Nice. Others have Andy Cato. We're going to have James Evans. Not Evans, Edwards.
Edwards. So you know what? That is the other thing, isn't it? Talking about the Carbon Calling and all that sort of stuff. It's just all pretty cool, isn't it? So I've realised this now. So when I was a kid, I wasn't very cool when I was in high school. It was all right, but it wasn't. And then sort of went to university and did all this rave stuff and realized that you start realizing I'm the geek shall inherit the earth type thing. And going through with farming growing up, it was all very didn't really fit in with the young farmers club in Wales type. It wasn't that. And then at somewhere along the line, this kind of regenerative agricultural kind of community type thing. And you're like, my people, even within farming, that's the other thing, talking about ranting on Instagram and all that sort of stuff. You go to someone like Carbon Calling and I'm like, don't really need to rant, because we're all everyone's kind of free thinking, and not everyone might agree, but everyone can kind of listen to each other and talk. But you really find your people, and you do find 1 minute you're talking about earthworms and the next thing you're dancing to Niles's evil drum and bass at 3 o'clock in the morning in a sheep shed with Silas, who's drunk way too many pints of cider, and Emma trying to go to bed, and you're like, this is farming. I never thought, do you know what I mean? Somehow it's all come together, raving and farming. And yeah, so that's the other side of all this sort of stuff, is that we're so lucky, I guess, that we've now go back 20 years, and for people like us, we were definitely in little isolated pockets, even 10 years ago. Whereas there's much more of a community of these left of centre. I was amazed the first time I went to this sort of stuff. I'm like, oh, you guys all listen to pretty cool music too. And you aren't very farmery. I thought I was the weird one. But actually, yeah, there's a lot of very cool people in farming, isn't there?
Well, we look forward to your set, James.
I think
Liz, do you want to ask
the
Kirsty Young question as the last one?
Niels has been booked for his set of his techno.
Good man. Yeah,
he's got to do this 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. We'll
do it. It's a deal then. It's a date.
So I'm, as Nick has just alluded to, I'm starting to listen to the Kirsty Young podcast, and her question is, what advice would you give your younger self? And to make it more specific, I think because the mental health bits come out a couple of times, and you're also reflecting that you spend too much time in your car. So what would your younger self say to you about relaxation or work-life balance?
My younger self. What would my younger self say to me, or what would I say to my younger self?
What advice, would you give to your younger self on... No, that doesn't make any sense.
Liz, you're not being very Kirsty.
I know, I just realised it makes no sense.
To be fair, I think both my older self and my younger self. So I think my older self would give my younger self probably now the same advice that my younger self would give my older self, which is something along the lines of like, just remember that a lot of the time it probably doesn't matter. And to just remember to be you and never lose yourself in it, and always have your, like, make sure it's always a fucking adventure still. Like, you don't have to do anything. None of it really matters, you know. Like, you can easily lose yourself in all of this and sicken yourself of it and lose the spark and the adventure and whatever you're doing in life. And when it stops becoming an adventure, and I'm not talking about, like, there's always hard times, you know, there's always difficult times, there's always stuff that you've got to struggle through, and it will get better in the end usually. But when it doesn't, and you just go through these hard times and then more fucking hard times, and it just, you know, it's just a bit shit, whether that be a relationship or whether that be work stuff or whatever, you know, it is all right. Like, you know, I've always been a fighter and I've always pushed on, but it is all right sometimes to go, nah, it's a bit wank, really. Like, I'm going to change my reality. Like, you are the master of your own reality and destiny. You know what I mean? Whether that be on your own farm or in, you know, whatever, like, if you're not changing it, you're choosing it. And, you know, you have the greatest influence over your own life. Like, I used to be terrible for it. And I still am, of always looking to blame somebody or something else. And I've had some pretty shit dudes, but the person who's had the greatest positive and detrimental impact over my own life has been me. The person who's had the biggest effect on my relationships and stuff like that with people, girlfriends, you know, parents, whatever, has been me. The person, you know, the person who's let me down the most has been me. And the person who's, you know, done whatever, you know what I mean? And, like, yeah, I don't know if any of that made any sense at all, really.
So
maybe there's a whole...
I've also just Googled the question, and it is about what advice you'd give to your younger self. So that, I think the point about, it's almost like this too will pass, won't it? And that...
Yeah. And but also don't get locked into thinking that like you can change anything. Like, you can change, you are infinitely capable of doing all sorts of amazing stuff. Like, you know, it will pass, bad times will pass. But if those bad times don't pass and you don't like something, don't enjoy something, and it doesn't bring you adventure and joy ever, don't fucking do it. No one, like don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. Don't worry about if people, you know, think, oh, you know, he's a quitter or he's that. Like, you know, it's okay to think, and that's not the same like saying like don't farm, but it's all right to think, yeah, I'm not going to do it like this. Like, I'm going to do it how I would like to do it, or I'm going to do it in my way, because that's what makes me happy. And whether that's on a family farm or that's on whatever, you know, the situation, there's been lots of times when I've got locked into thinking I had to show people or do things a certain way or whatever else, and it wasn't making me happy, and it was bringing me loads of stress. And I came to a moment last year, I had a massive breakdown. I was trying to finish all these lambs, and like you said, it was pissing it down, and my best dog died, and this, that, and the other. And I was so obsessed with finishing all the lambs and making like all this maximum money. And then I just sold a fucking lot of store lambs. And I went and like had a bit of time off and looked after my mental health, and it was all right. But I convinced myself that if I did that, you know, it was going to be like the end of everything, because I, you know, was losing some money. And I don't know, just be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. Look after yourself. Be kind to yourself. And life should always be an adventure. And if you go too long and it's not an adventure, then maybe something's not quite right. Because you only get one of them. You're a very, very long time dead. And we could all like, you know, like graft and work and run around in circles, and then fall down the stairs next week. So, you know, grasp the joy in life that you can when you can. Take the time. There's always time. I hear all the time people say there isn't time for that. There's always time. You might have to, you know, switch things around and sacrifice something, but there is always time to spend with the people you loved. There is always time to do the things that make you happy on the inside. And because if you're not doing that, what does the rest of it really, really matter?
I was looking at this the other day about this. It's the infamous definition of growth mindset, isn't it? Which is everything is possible, and that's why a lot of us are like attracted to the ReGen movement because it's not about moaning. It's about opportunities and adventures and what can we try next.
Yes,
And the parallel opposite to that is this victim mentality, which I think winds us up about some of the chat we get from farmers some days.
Yes. I mean, like, it's so easy to do, though. So easy to do. I've done it. We've all done it. Like, life is terrible. I mean, is it really that bad? Because, I mean, I was in the Ukraine a couple of times this year, and, like, life's a bit shitter in bits of the Ukraine than it is here, how bad it is. And you keep going, it's all relative. It's that context thing, isn't it? But as an industry, like, we're pretty lucky. And I think the regenerative thing, exactly like you said, it's full of hope, and all the conversations you have in a regenerative kind of like context are like about stuff we're going to do and stuff we're doing and stuff we could do and stuff we want to do. And a lot of traditional conversations about how stuff other people need to do and stuff other people are doing to us and not doing for us. And well, there's no fucking point anyway, because it's terrible, and you're right. It's the optimism, because you might as well think it's all going to work out. Because if it doesn't, you're still in the same position, but you've at least, you might as well live in fucking optimism, mightn't you? But I think positive thinking and a positive mindset is that's probably my biggest failing, or one of my biggest failings, apart from talking too much, is I suffer a bit of depression, and I can be really glum, and I can get myself in a mindset of, like, something small happens, I deal with the stress badly, and then I get very negative. And then I watch that now just impact on my entire business and everything around me and everyone around me. And it's the same as an industry. You go and sit the average bunch of people from the pub to supermarket in a room with a bunch of regenerative farmers who are talking about the things they talk about and being enthusiastic. And by the end of it, they've carried those people with them. Do you know what I mean? You go and sit a bunch of those people in a room full of people telling you about how hard done by they are after they just got out of their Range Rover wearing their shuffle. You lose people pretty quick,
Yeah, and that I suppose is part of where we would like that carbon calling, or a lot of our events sit, which is trying to help in that the people on the cusp, but where they want to do something different and don't quite have the confidence. So some of it comes from confidence or seeing different ways, or there's a variety of reasons why, and some of it is about a massive chunk of perspective. And so if you only speak to people who have a similar idea to you, then that perspective can be quite challenging to find.
Yeah. And I think also the other thing with, like, I think the one thing with regenerative agriculture we maybe need to address slightly, where the big shift comes, is need to start talking about the money. Nobody in farming likes talking about like making money. People are very quick to talk about what money they're not making and how hard done by they are and what they're not getting. But, like, regenerative agricultural practices don't need to be 6 sheep, 3 cows, and you know what I mean. I'm quite into large scale, profitable regenerative agriculture. When I first came to this part of the world, I had huge ideas about sort of integrating all these different estates and doing all this stuff, which unfortunately breaks down on people rather than anything else. But you can make some quite good money, and as a new entrant, you can. I mean, there's some great cases. There's lots of great cases, but I think that's something that probably as an industry we need to get less uncomfortable about talking about, like, what works and actually that you can make some money in farming. And I think regenerative agriculture probably has quite a big part to play in that, because I'll say it here and I'll die on this hill that the biggest problem is not how much we're getting for the stuff we sell, which is what everyone goes on about. Biggest problem is how much it's costing us to produce it. Like, lamb prices are crazy, beef prices are crazy, like, everything's good. Okay, I'm not a veg grower, but what crucifies you is your cost of production. And anybody building a large scale profitable, or aiming to build a large scale profitable livestock business right now or going forward, like, has to be looking at regenerative principles. Just has to be. It gets tricky in this country because of scale, but I mean, Like, that's the kind of golden egg, isn't it? It's the prices are good. Now, how can we make them for a lot less than we currently, how can we produce that product for a lot less than we currently are? Same with like nutrition and food. It's all very well like producing small amounts of livestock and then meat and then selling to your local community. But what we need to do is nourish shitloads of people with good quality, accessible, affordable food. And that's only going to be done through scale. And going forward over the next 50 years, I can't see how we can produce food at scale without using those regenerative principles, but we just have to, Yeah,
and certainly, well, we're conscious of very similar things, particularly on the financial piece. And so that's the conference in June will focus on that, or there'll be quite a lot of information on figures, or anybody presenting will be encouraged to present their financial piece as much as they can. And the scale piece is also something we've not wrestled with, but I agree with you, which is we're not going to, the level of shift that has to happen is incredible, and how we're approaching it at the moment, doesn't quite work.
No. Well, I mean, it's like this thing, right? I keep seeing people say this stuff on Instagram, social media. People argue that regenerative agriculture is not going to feed the world. Well, we're not trying to feed the world. We're just trying to nourish our local community. Yeah, that's cool, yeah. But who is going to feed them? Like, even the UK, forget the world. There are a shitload of people in London and all these cities. Like, somebody has to feed them. You can't just say, well, we're not trying to. Yes, so that's great. So you're going to produce your organic Highland beef boxes to sell to 1,000 people. It doesn't matter a year. That's a drop in the ocean because somebody else has got to feed all these people. And do you know what I mean? We live in a bubble, in a sphere. It doesn't matter what we do if the other stuff is growing. Like, it's not. We need to get out of this offsetting model. Like, the system fundamentally needs to change. It's not like, oh, well, the system can continue and we'll just offset it over here by doing nice stuff. It's like, it's not actually making it any better, is it? We need to look at how we feed all of these people without fucking the planet. It's that simple, because we are going to have more people and we only have the planet we have. So long term, there ain't any other option, is there?
I don't disagree with you, but I think it's where you pitch. So for some, particularly when you're encouraging people to think slightly differently, it's too big. It's too big.
Oh yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Totally. But I mean,
so some of it is about local, and for some people, their definition or what they're working towards regenerative approaches is about local. But
yeah, no, and I totally agree. And especially even local to the point of looking after them and their own family, which I totally understand. But not everyone can do that. And if we were talking about the food system as such, it's the elephant in the room is, how do we feed all the other people that don't happen to live a privileged lifestyle in the countryside in a small community? Because let's not lie, if you did a run around of, like, I'm in Hampshire right now. If you did a run around of all these local communities, they're all very affluent. We create a two-tier food system then, don't we?
And I think yeah, and I suppose we've had some of these debates within other podcasts, and I'm yet to have it clearly in my brain, which is why I'm stuttering over it. But I think for me, it is about, there isn't going to be one solution. So
no.
That access to fruit and veg, albeit not sourced from a biodiverse necessarily farm, is better than processed food, is better. So a lot of it's trade-offs and entry points. And your point earlier on, which is about some of this involves funding and schemes that are different, and how do you guaranteed funding of some of these sort of approaches where you can get people who are not accessing fruit and veg on a regular basis to do so. So it's huge. And so that's why at certain points we have to then focus quite hyper local, because if we think too much, it just gets too big.
Yeah, I think where it comes from is, right, it's having my hat on, obviously, for my previous life of like working with those children and stuff. I see some quite well-to-do members of the farming community saying things like, well, people just need to spend more on their food. And I'm like, yes, I accept that is probably true. But you live in a multi-million-pound Georgian pile in the Surrey countryside. This is just made off the top of my head. And your kids go to private school, and you go to Waitrose or Marks and Spencer shopping and you have a chai latte and do your yoga at Waitrose, and you go back to your large arable estate, and then there are people that I know who like, all their shopping's in farm foods. They buy like the 100 like Richmond sausages for like £2.50, and we are a long way from buying an organic Highland beef box, like a long way. Like you said, just basically access to a balanced, nutritious diet would be a good start. And Christ, if we could manage to do like British produce, if we could basically feed people healthy British farmed food, that would be a very good start. And I think sometimes, having seen that world, you just realize like how complicated a problem it is. Like, it's more than just, it's a whole societal entrenched thing to do with education and value of food. And, it's a massive, massive thing to unpick, isn't it?
Can I interrupt you two? I've just got time management. We need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
But James, that has been amazing. I'm just conscious that it's been a long time. So James, where are you now, and how long have you got to get home?
Well, I'm currently sat in my truck on the driveway of the house that I've given up in Hampshire. I'm going to go back out of this truck in the dark and load the last of my possessions from the shed and the garage into a trailer, and then I'm going to drive it to Wales.
Now?
Yeah, tonight. Yeah, and then tomorrow morning I'm going to unload said trailer of stuff into a barn that I've built in Wales and a little bit of ground I bought. And then tomorrow I'm going to drive to Essex.
Thank you for listening to the ReGen Ag podcast. Huge thanks to our sponsor, Tim Nicholson from Cactus Tree Guards, Reno for the music, and Pete Ord, the podcast wizard from the studio at Sunbeams, part of the Annie Mawson Sunbeams Music Trust. See you next time.